go ahead and say something that's probably on some of your minds. It's that Christians are absolutely bizarre. So it's okay. I'll say it for you. And I know there's at least some percentage of you like, finally somebody's saying it out loud from a stage. It's true. I have this game that I play when I'm in a new city just to prove how odd, out of the ordinary, unique Christians are. I go into a new city, and if I'm in a car, I tune the radio dial, which is still something that cars have. I don't know if you know that. There's a radio dial in them. And I will dial in a radio station. I'll keep turning the knob until I hear a familiar sound. And it's a particular sound of drum. It's a particular sound of the guitar. And it's a sound that comes from a particular city, and that city is Nashville. And the game that I play, when I hear that particular sound, I stop on that station, and I try to guess before the lyrics start whether or not it is Christian or country. And then sometimes and the reason I say that is because both Christian music and country music are produced largely in the same city, in the same studios, and often with the same musicians playing on those albums. And I try to see if I get it right, which, to be honest, even once the lyrics start, I'm not totally sure sometimes. It takes like the entire song. You know what I'm talking about? Like, I love you more than my truck. Could be super country. But could also be like, I love you more than my truck. You know. The Jesus is my girlfriend songs. It's okay, I'm allowed to say this. It's just odd. You know, it's a different kind of unique thing. And I'm not knocking Christian music. I love a lot of it. I'm not knocking country music. Not publicly, but But it's strange to me, which reminds me of another thing that might strike you as odd if you're kind of new to a space like this. Christians sing so much. We just got done doing a lot of it, and I love it. I love singing. But that might strike you as odd. Like, that's a really strange thing, and you might wonder, why do they sing so much? And you might guess, like, oh, the reason Christians sing so much is because they believe crazy things. But if they set it to a goosebumpy melody, then maybe they don't focus on how crazy the thing is that they believe. Or maybe they sing so much to sort of, get in this transcendental state and forget about life for a while, and that might not seem really courageous for you, like somebody who's really facing the realities of life. I don't know, that might strike you as odd. But if you think Christians are odd for that reason or for a lot of other reasons, it is nothing compared to the person that Christians claim to follow, because Jesus was absolutely bizarre, out of the ordinary. And in this series, you're going to be exposed to some things that Jesus said, he did, effects that he had on history that really, I think, cause us to pay attention. Whether or not you believe him or believe he is who he says he is, whether or not you follow him, I do think that his life was lived in such a way that it can grab your attention if you're paying attention. Now, normally if you are here on a weekend or you catch the Vantage Point messages online, listening to them or watching them, what you'll see is someone up here, usually Mark, the lead pastor of Vantage Point Church, opening up the Bible and extracting ideas from those stories and those teachings to see if that has some benefit to your life and the way that you understand your life and the things that you're going through. And today I'm going to pull out some sentences from the Bible, but it's going to be a little bit different than that. I want to begin this series by zooming out and taking kind of a historical perspective of the person of Jesus, all to answer a question that I think is really productive to answer. And that question is simply this: who is Jesus? I think it's important to answer that question because of the kind of life he lived and the mark that he left on history. Who is Jesus? And I know what my Sunday school teacher told me. I know what some Christians have told me before. I know some ideas that I've gotten maybe from, documentaries I've seen or articles that I've read. But is there a way for us to strip away all the cholesterol that's been built up over time or the bad examples that we see in people's lives around us and really focus on the real McCoy? Who is Jesus? Now, if you're a follower of Jesus, I think you're going to get a lot out of these few weeks. You might be exposed to some things that you did not know about Jesus or maybe didn't remember about Jesus. And if you really pay attention, I believe that it's going to deepen your appreciation, maybe even your devotion to the person of Jesus. But if you're not a follower of Jesus or you're really not sure what you think about that, then I think these next few weeks are going to be really beneficial for you as well. I think there's going to be some surprises for you. I think that there's going to be some moments where you're going to wonder, like, maybe I should share this message with some of my Christian friends because I think they've forgotten some of this stuff. So that might be a benefit for you. Now, I want to make a note here at the beginning that we live in a time where people are looking for ways to be divided. And when you're talking about Jesus, particularly in comparison with other religions and other faiths, it looks like it could be another way to divide people into categories, but that's not the goal of today nor the rest of the series. Instead, think of this today as a chance to just gain some new information, to be enlightened maybe, and earn an appreciation for all kinds of different backgrounds and faiths and beliefs so that you can make up your own mind. That's the point of today. Now, one place that you could look to really understand what makes a religion or a philosophy or a way of life tick is to get to the start, to go back to the start, like the founder of that thing. And that's really what I intend to do today. Where do we look to find out details of someone's life? You know, it could be a biography or an autobiography if they wrote it for themselves. It could be historical works written about that person, looking back, or maybe somebody that was a contemporary of that person. And even there, when we look at the sources of the story of Jesus, he seems odd, a little out of the ordinary. And let me show you what I mean. Buddha, his life, he was actually born, Siddhartha Gautama was his name. His life and teachings were actually written centuries after he died. That's historical fact. I'm not saying they're not valid or true, that's just when they were written down. Muhammad, his teachings were written down right away, so we have some reliability that that's actually what Muhammad taught. But the most trustworthy biography of Muhammad was actually collected by a guy named al-Bukhari 200 years after Muhammad lived. Again, not saying that it's not valid or not true, but that's just historical fact. Jesus, a little bit different. There are 3 biographies written from eyewitness accounts of Jesus, some of his closest friends. There's a collection of works from other close followers, Peter and Paul, the effect that Jesus had on their lives. Those were all written within a couple of years, a few years after Jesus' death. That is now historical fact. All scholars, even people who don't think God speaks through the Bible, believe that that's true. There was the work of Josephus. He was a Jewish man. He was not a follower of Jesus. He wrote about Jesus a lot. There was the collected works of this Gentile doctor named Luke. That's actually in the Bible. He was not a Jewish man, as far as we could tell, not even a religious man to begin with, but collected these eyewitness accounts of Jesus' life within a few years of his death. There's all kinds of historical sightings of Jesus that were written about him around that time. Most of those are critical of Jesus. They're making fun of Jesus. But what's interesting about that is they still don't differ on the historical accounts of his life. They still agree with what his closest friends and followers said about Jesus, even if they're making fun of him. So, in other words, again, just whatever you want to believe from this, we actually have more evidence that not only did Jesus exist, but these are those things that he taught, and this is what his life did. We have more evidence of that than any other person who lived at the same time as Jesus, including the Caesar, like the most powerful man in the world at the time. We know more about Jesus. That's fascinating to me. One of his original followers wrote this down. It's one of the most famous sentences ever written. Even if you've never cracked a Bible, you've heard this, mostly because of baseball games. John 3:16. One English rendering of this says, "For this is how God loved the world." This is how he loved you. He gave his one and only Son so that everyone who believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. This biographer, this close friend of Jesus, in the original language is saying that God gave his one-of-a-kind Son. That's what it literally means. So in other words, from his perspective, his experience, there has never been anybody like Jesus. He's just odd. And I think it's interesting to pay attention to that. Now, from all of the sources, there is an abundance of details about Jesus' life, and I think that's also helpful as we compare him to the people who started other religions. Again, let's start with Buddha. Buddha, he was born as royalty. Again, his name was Siddhartha Gautama. He married a princess, so that kind of sounds like a fairy tale movie. When he was 19, he decided to leave all of that behind, left royalty, riches, left his wife, when he came across an old man, a sick man, and a dead man. This is what tradition tells us. And that kind of stunned him a little bit. He's like, what am I living for? And he went on the search for what he would call enlightenment. I need the divine to tell me what's really going on in the world, like what's really wrong and what's the real solution for the pain that we're experiencing. And the Buddha claimed, tradition tells us, that he got this enlightenment, the divine download, when he was sitting under this very particular fig tree. So he's sitting down there meditating, and the divine download happened and he got enlightenment. Muhammad was born in Mecca about 500 years after Jesus. Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, was born 550 years before Jesus, then Muhammad 500 years after Jesus. Born in Mecca, he was raised by his grandmother. He married a rich widow and then had 9 more wives after that. He claimed enlightenment or revelation, divine revelation, when he was about 40 years old, and that's where his teachings came from, was this divine download. Just by way of comparison, whatever you want to make of this, Jesus, interestingly enough, was born about 2,000 years ago in poverty, right outside the city of Jerusalem, the modern-day city of Jerusalem, in what is the modern-day city of Bethlehem. He was born to super, super poor Jewish parents. Oddly enough, Jesus never claimed to have received enlightenment for all the things that he taught. And this is really, again, so bizarre. Jesus, and you have to take it for what it's worth, Jesus only ever cited himself as the authority and the source of all the things that he was teaching, which is a really bold move. It's not like, the universe told me this thing and that's why you should trust it, or God showed up, or an angel, this vision happened to me in the middle of the forest and that's why you should pay attention to me. He's like, no, these are my ideas. This is how you should live your life. That's what Jesus claimed. The ends of these lives also are really interesting by comparison. I don't know what it tells you about what they taught, but I just think it's fascinating as a comparison. This was part of what I went through before I ever started following Jesus. I looked at these biographies just to see if I could a little bit crack the code of what made these people tick and what motivated them to start the movements that they started. Buddha, he died likely from dysentery, from eating bad meat. And if you don't know what dysentery is, I don't encourage that you Google it. It seems horrible. Maybe that's why all the modern depictions of Buddha, he's like very well-fed and happy, because he did not die well-fed and happy. He ate bad meat and some things happened and dead. That was Buddha. Several thousand of people followed his teachings at the time of his death. Muhammad, he had started a political empire, multiple nations. He died at the age of around 62, I think, of some illness. It's not known. Multiple thousands of people following the teachings of Muhammad would claim to be Muslims. Baha'u'llah, which is the founder of the Baha'i faith, if you've heard of that, he died in his mansion when he was 74 years old. Several thousand people following him. I'm from LA, so L. Ron Hubbard is a big figure out there. And L. Ron Hubbard died also at the age of 74 from a collection of illnesses, probably died at home. One of those things was pancreatitis, and that's a pretty vicious way to go. Several thousands of followers mourned him. Jesus was sentenced to the most cruel death ever conceived by humanity, died capital punishment on a Roman cross. And as far as we can tell from historical data, a handful of men, women, and children claimed to follow him when he died, like maybe 30, right when he died. So that's interesting to me. But for all of those religious founders, and there's certainly more we could look at, the only reason any of us have ever heard of any of these people is because they said or modeled something that other people found to be helpful. Oh, finally, you help me make sense of life. Finally, you help me make sense of this fear that I have. Finally, you help me know what God is like and how to be okay with God or the universe or whatever's out there. They've done some things, or they claimed some things that many people have found to be really helpful or clarifying a vision for life that people adopted. That's the only reason any of us have heard of any of them, is because people decided to put their life or teachings into practice. And just as a total sidebar, I've always had this little dream that I wish we could somehow make happen. Kind of like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Have you ever seen Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure? Anybody? Yeah. There's some cool people here. I'm not saying that if you haven't seen it, you're not cool. I'm just saying that you could be cooler. And if you go see the movie, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's Keanu pre-John Wick, pre-Neo. There's not even an aroma of who he would become as John Wick in the character he played in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. It's a whole lot less blood and a whole lot more bro. But anyway, that's beside the point. I'm not talking about Keanu Reeves. Stop making me talk about Keanu Reeves. I love him so much. Okay, so Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Basically, in this movie, these two high school students, I think it's actually a documentary. They find this time machine in an old phone booth, and they go back through time and they collect all of these historical figures. They bring them back to modern day San Dimas football rules, and they bring them back and do this like presentation to their school, like a history presentation, and they get an A. That's the whole point of the movie, and it's amazing. I've thought it'd be kind of cool if we had one of those phone booths and we could go back and kidnap basically all the founders of all the major world religions and bring them here on this stage at Vantage Point. That'd be pretty amazing, like the actual people. And then you'd line them up shoulder to shoulder, Siddhartha Gautama, maybe the writers of the Vedas, which is the Hindu faith, certainly Jesus and Muhammad, like just line them all up. And then give them the floor. Let them talk about what they think is really going on and the biggest problems facing humanity and what they predict is the solution to those problems. Just let them talk. And then in that scene, I've imagined that we have an open mic moment and we get to ask questions, and then some idiot in the room, because it's 2022, gets up to the microphone and taps. He's like, hey, you know what? He totally sounds like Keanu Reeves now that I think about it. He's like, you know what we figured out? Just, like centuries later, and just like sort of a cursory knowledge of your teachings and some Google searching that I've done, and my buddy Rick, what we figured out is you're all basically saying the same thing. I don't know if you've heard this, or maybe you just sort of assume this. Hey, all of you, thanks so much for time traveling to share with us your heart and your mind and your thinking. We've just kind of figured out that you're all scratching the same itch. Do you know what they would probably say in response? Have you been paying attention? Because we are not saying the same thing, and the precision is important. So we cannot maintain that all of these religious founders and all of these faiths and all of these worldviews are saying the same thing in the name of tolerance, which is what we want to say. Like, it sounds so nice to say it that way. No, the only way you could maintain that is from a place of ignorance. It's because you have not been paying attention to what is most important to these people. If they stood on their own ground, you would realize that they are saying remarkably different things about what's really going on, about what's really wrong, and about what you could do about it. For instance, in the Muslim faith, there are 5 pillars. This is how you're supposed to live your life and how you're supposed to please your creator, Allah. 5 pillars include giving alms, praying 5 times a day, fasting during Ramadan, and if you're able, traveling to Mecca. That's part of the 5 pillars of Islam so that you can live a qualified life. The spiritual goal of the Hindu faith is to finally reach a state of self-realization that you are one with Brahma, the divine, that there's a divine in all of us, and that we are all really just one existence, this one divine existence. Maybe this kind of sounds familiar. We are all God, the plants and the animals and every human in this room. And the reason that you are reincarnated is to give you another shot at that self-realization. And the way you are to solve that problem, like not knowing who you really are, is called the 4 ways of the Hindu faith. And that's through praying enough, that's through knowing enough, that's through being devoted enough, and that's through being good enough. Those are the 4 ways of the Hindu faith, like becoming enough or behaving good enough to finally reach that self-enlightenment. The Hindu faith is trying to say, like, listen, you need to uncover the truth about who you really are. And you do that by becoming smart enough and working hard enough. Islam wants you to know that, listen, you don't have to be so confused about how to make your creator happy or okay with you, that Allah will be okay with you if you follow these 5 pillars. And this is the way you're supposed to live your life. Buddha the big goal of Buddhism was to eliminate suffering. One of the major tenets of Buddhism is that life is suffering. And some of you, as you exist today, you would probably agree, because your life is marked by so much suffering. And so the way that Buddhist practice tries to eliminate suffering in your life is to diminish desire, because that's where your suffering comes from. You want to be more comfortable. You want to have more money. You want to have a better relationship. And if you would stop wanting those things, then you would not suffer as a consequence of not having those things. That's the Buddhist way of life. I'm oversimplifying, but that is the way they want you to live your life. That's where you find it. You're finally free from suffering because you are free from desire. Now again, there are so many things that these faiths share in common, beautiful things that have contributed to world history, but there's so many important, crucial things that are distinct. And to ask somebody who is a devoted adherent to any of these faiths to sort of tolerate all of the other faiths in the world and kind of see themselves in the same grouping is to ask them to ignore the things that they are most convicted by. And it's hateful and ignorant to do it. Let them stand on their own terms and let them explore and live out what they say they believe and they understand about the world. Jesus, in contrast to all of these, stands apart in so many ways. Just one example, Jesus said, do not reduce desire. In fact, Jesus taught the opposite. Yeah, he said life is suffering. He leveled with you. In this life you will have trouble, but you don't have to be afraid. I've overcome the world. But Jesus would say, no, don't reduce your desire. In fact, what Jesus said is so inflate your desire that you would only ultimately be satisfied by something only God could give you. That's why the most common question Jesus would ask somebody when he interacted with them is, what do you want? What do you want? Well, I want my marriage to be better. I want my financial life to be better. I want to see. He talked to blind people. And of course, what I want to see. He's like, okay, is that enough? Is that enough? What do you want? Do you want more? Do you want more? Do you want more? So inflate your desire that, yeah, you're going to face suffering, but you may find that you uncover, you can actually experience the thing that you most deeply long for. But there is one categorical difference of what Jesus taught among many examples that is so odd and so bizarre, and it's the thing that first caught my attention years ago when I started to explore the person of Jesus and eventually, full disclosure, became a follower of Jesus. And to understand the biggest difference between Jesus and all the other religions and the religious founders on our time travel panel that we have up here, I got to take you on just a really quick trip through a conversation that Jesus had, so please track with me. Even at the height of Jesus' popularity, he was talking about his impending death. Things are going really well, Jesus. And he's like, yeah, but pretty soon it's not going to be going well. And they're like, oh, come on, Jesus. And he's like, no, it's cool. Like, we're healing people, but pretty soon I'm going to die. Like, no, let's stop talking about the death part. This is really going well. Like, but it's not going to be going very well in a little bit. And it was very disorienting to his disciples. And there's this one moment where he's talking about his death, where he was comforting his disciples as they're trying to make sense of it. And it's in John 14, one of the biographies of Jesus, verse 4. And Jesus says to his disciples, I know this is confusing. I know you're going to feel lost if I'm gone. But he says, you know the way to where I am going. Now, normally when a religious teacher says you know the way, what they mean is you know the ritual. Like you know the practice. You know what to do at 5 p.m. and pray towards this direction. Like you know the way of life. But that's not what Jesus is saying. And the reason we know that is because of the conversation that happens after this. So then Thomas, one of his followers, responds to this, no, we don't know, Lord. We don't know the way to where you're going. We have no idea where you're going, so how could we know the way? Really logical thing. Like, I don't know where you're off to, so how could I possibly know how to get there? And Jesus is about to say, not only do you know the destination of life, but you do know how to have it. And here's how he says it. Jesus told him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me. This is what they longed for most, was to have a relationship with their Creator, the manufacturer of their souls. And he was saying that's where all of life is headed. And do you want to know the way to get there? You met him. This is the categorical difference between Jesus, whatever you want to believe about this, and every other religion. Look it up for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Jesus is the only religious founder who claimed to be the way, not just know the way. Let that sink in. Again, he might be a lunatic for saying this, but we cannot ignore it. Jesus is the only religious founder who claimed to be the way, not just know the way. Think about it. If Jesus just taught you the way to live, like here's the rules of the game, you're like, sweet, I can go play the game, Jesus. I don't need you anymore. Appreciate the heads up. Thanks for the playbook. I'm off on my own. Jesus didn't claim that. Jesus never said that the biggest problem facing humanity was a behavioral problem. If you could just get your act together, then finally, you would please your Creator. Jesus didn't say that the biggest problem facing humanity is an intellectual problem. Like if you would just know better and know enough and finally solve all the problems and answer all of your questions, then finally you'd be living. No, Jesus said, and you have to decide if this resonates as true with you. Jesus said that the biggest problem facing the human soul is an interpersonal problem. You can know a whole lot of things, and you can be a really decent human being, and you still would not be with whom your soul is meant to be with. And it stands to reason that if the deepest problem that we're facing is an interpersonal problem, the only solution to that would be a person. Not a set of teachings, not a set of behaviors, not a bunch of answered questions. If the deepest problem that we're facing is an interpersonal problem, the only solution to that must be a person. So it's possible that what Jesus is saying is, yeah, prayer and meditation is super healthy. I think you're built to benefit from those things. Yes, let's pay attention to your character and your integrity, which is why so many people of different faiths that focus on character integrity have done so much good in the world. Those are good things. But Jesus is saying, don't stop short as you're uncovering how you're supposed to live your life. All of the hows in the world will not address the deepest need that you have for a who. And without that who, all of the hows are going to feel empty and endless. Later on in this conversation, Philip, another follower of Jesus, a close friend of his, said in verse 8, Lord, show us the Father, and we will be satisfied. Can we just see God? I just want to know God. And this is such a beautiful response from Jesus, if not totally crazy. Jesus said, have I been with you all this time, Philip, and yet you still don't know who I am? Wait, what? Philip just said, we want to see God. And Jesus said, you've been with me all this time, and you don't know who I am? Then just to clarify, in case they weren't picking up on it, he said, as clear as day, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. In other words, if you know Jesus, you know God. That's either the best news ever or the craziest thing anybody's ever claimed. You decide. The Buddhist Ceylon, which is an annual publication of their teachings, recently said that Buddhism is, they said it's ultimately not a religion, it's a practice, but it's a religion which, without starting with a God, so not starting with some idea that there is a God, leads humans to a stage where God is not necessary. That's the whole approach of Buddhism, that you won't need some God at all. Muslims, they do not worship Muhammad. Muhammad didn't want them to. They revere the prophet, but they do not worship Muhammad. Jesus not only claimed to be divine, he accepted worship from people as though he was God, he was divine. It seems as though all of the ways he lived his life, this man believed sincerely what he was saying and how he lived. In fact, there's this famous agnostic, really smart guy, George Bernard Shaw. He's a Nobel Prize-winning playwright, famous atheist. Doesn't believe there is a God, but he really believed that Jesus believed what he said, even if he was delusional. There's this quote I found from George Bernard Shaw that might be helpful. Whether you believe with the evangelists, that's the biography writers, that Christ could have rescued himself by a miracle or he could have defended himself effectually, the fact remains he did not do so as he faced his death. The consensus on this point is really important. I added the really. This consensus on this point is important because it proves the absolute sincerity of Jesus' declaration that he was a God. No imposter would have been nerved to endure them by the conviction that he would rise from the grave and live again after 3 days. Jesus truly believed that this was what was going to happen. The only way the gap between us and God could ever be bridged, Jesus would say, is not found in your ability, but is ultimately found in him. And that is what is behind the most famous idea that I think the world has ever had to encounter. And that's again in John 3:16. This is how God loved the world. He gave his one-of-a-kind son so that everyone who believes in him will not perish, but have eternal life. Everyone who believes in him, not behaves perfectly, knows all the answers, but trusts their life to Jesus, will not perish, but have eternal life. Jesus was living with this vision, and George Bernard Shaw would say maybe it was delusional. He had this vision of what was going to happen or what was possible if we were to follow him that drove him to do things that do not make sense otherwise. Which, just as a side note, is such a powerful way to live your life. Every person in this room is living in 3 time zones. You live in the present, right? Like you're here in this room right now, and you're present in this moment, but you are also living with some recollection of your past experience. You've got that in your mind. You have that in your experience. But you also have some idea or dream or fear of the future. So we're always sitting here in these 3 time zones. And unless we decide to live differently, watch this, we are going to allow by default our past experiences, failures, people who inspired us, examples, to tell us what we are capable of in the present, okay? But there's another way to live. The other way to live is to get some crystal clear, white hot vision of what is possible in the future and let that dictate what you should be doing in your present moment. There's this Jewish writer that wrote about Jesus that because of the joy set before him, crystal clear, white hot vision of the future, he was able to endure the punishment of the cross. And what was so encouraging to me, an idea that changed my life, was that Jesus was less concerned on what the past dictated about the future. He was focused on what the future told him about what was possible in the present. And that joy set before him in the future, do you know what that joy was? You. The possibility of a perfect relationship with you was so worth it and filled him with so much joy that he was able to endure any possible suffering right now if it meant that the future could happen. That's how Jesus lived his life, and he's calling us to live with that same perspective. Because of what is possible in this life with Jesus, we can endure whatever challenges we face in our present moment. That's what it means to follow this odd, bizarre, out of the ordinary, extraordinary man, Jesus. So yeah, I agree with you. Christians can be absolutely weird sometimes, but man, I think it makes sense because the person that we follow colored way outside the lines. And over the next few weeks, we're going to uncover the effect that this person had on history, and you can make up your own mind whether or not you want to follow Jesus more deeply or you want to run the other way. Because Jesus claimed to be the only way that anyone needs to know. And you would think that a claim like that would divide people and the religion would die out, but over the next few messages, you're going to see the historical impact that this nobody from nowhere had on the world. And I think we are all going to be surprised to find out how much we appreciate a world that only Jesus could create. We appreciate lives that only Jesus could create. Now, if you've backed away from conversations like this in the past because you are dead set on never becoming like some Christians that you know, I want to encourage you that I'm pretty sure Jesus wouldn't want you to become like some Christians that you know. And I think the next few weeks are going to help clarify the difference between the infirmities of our humanity and our fears and our hate and our prejudice and the person of Jesus. The person who solves what I believe is the deepest need of all of humanity, the interpersonal need that we all have for our souls to be united with the creator of our lives and the writer of our futures, the God who loves us enough to do everything necessary to give you a perfect relationship with him. I hope over the next few weeks, I hope today actually I've encouraged you. Maybe I've made some of you mad. Or maybe I've just convinced you to look a little bit closer. That would be incredible. I do hope that today has explained a little bit more why people like me, some people around you, over 2 billion people in the world today, still claim to follow him, seek him, love him, worship him, and why so many of us are convinced now more than ever that there is truly no one like Jesus. Let me pray for you. Jesus, thank you that because of what you have done, I have an uninterrupted relationship with the creator of my soul. And my prayer is nothing less than life change. That as we examine and expose ourselves to the story and maybe re-enter the story or rediscover it for some of us, that God, we would grow closer to you. Because by doing that, I trust that we will become more alive, that our lives will expand the more of you that we know. Jesus, this is my prayer. We love you. Thank you for loving us. In your name we pray. Amen.